And now on to our final closing quarter of today, and that's Law and Court. This is an interesting panel discussion whereby we get to meet and greet and focus our attention to Attorney Ramesh Khurana, CPA Adil Baloch, and Attorney Daniel J. Wright. As we say goodbye to this month of May this trio give us insight on post-marital agreements. Now that's a heavy topic. Let's pay attention, and by the way, this is a presentation of Attorney and Counselor at Law, Mr. Daniel J. Wright.
Welcome to the Capital Forum. This is Ramesh Khurana, Attorney at Law. I have my office in Gaithersburg, Maryland, and today I have a great privilege to welcome two very renowned professionals. One is an attorney at law, and second one is a CPA. Why we have invited one attorney and one CPA? Because the topic which we are going to discuss today is about the post-nuptial agreement, and especially what is the role played by CPAs in case of divorce proceedings, and this is how Mr. Adil Baloch is going to contribute his thoughts to the discussion. Now, to my immediate left is Mr. Daniel Wright, who is a very knowledgeable and very committed lawyer. In fact, he practices family law, criminal law, and also the corporate law, which is a very rare combination. Now, I remember one time a question was asked from Dan, how he is able to manage these three different types of practices. He said he has been doing it for quite a long time, more than 3 decades. It's really a very long time to be in legal practice. Welcome to our studios.
Thank you, Ramesh.
And to my extreme left is Mr. Adil Baloch, who's a CPA and CTRS. He has his office in Montgomery Village, Maryland, and he has been around for more than a decade, I believe now, and he's going to be a very active participant in the discussion. So, as I said, the topic of our discussion is what is a post-nup agreement. I know that many marriages end in divorce, and some smart couples, they always plan for the worst case scenario, and I think post-nup agreement probably fits in there. Can you please explain, because you are a family law practitioner, like what is the significance of preparing a post-nup agreement when one didn't care to prepare the pre-nup agreement?
Well, a post-nuptial agreement or a post-marital agreement is the same thing essentially as a premarital agreement. It just comes after the parties have been married. Now, sometimes things happen during the course of a marriage where it leads you to believe that you need to plan for every eventuality. It could be a divorce, could be a death, many different things. But a post-nuptial agreement is something that the courts will enforce. Each party discloses their assets and their income and their liabilities, their debts to each other, and the parties reach an agreement on what would happen in the event of a possible divorce. Most marriages these days do end in divorce.
I like it when you say that there should be a fair and full disclosure of all assets by both the parties. And if there is a fraud involved, I think courts would kick out this kind of agreement from the court. It will not be enforced. Good to know that. Now, tell us, of course, you explained to us that post-nup agreement is going to be signed by the parties while they are already married. Yes. And now they are feeling the need for such an agreement so that rights and liabilities can be fully described. Now, what are the issues which will be addressed in the post-nup agreement?
Well, the issues would be what becomes of the assets of the parties in the event of a divorce. Do they have to be sold? Does one party take one house, another party take another house? If there's a small business involved, what becomes of the small business? If there are retirement assets, who gets what portion of a 401k or a pension? There can be many different issues, and how these are resolved through planning is always better than through last-minute litigation.
And well said, and that is why the family practitioners do coordinate with the CPAs. Oh, and yes. CPAs also play a very significant amount of role in divorce proceedings. Now, Mr. Baloch, Can you tell us, please, how do you help people who are going through a very difficult time in their lives when they approach you, like they want to prepare their statements? So how do you help these kinds of people?
While Dan was mentioning finances and businesses and assets and those kind of things, I've actually over the years I've helped a number of people go through this unfortunate process. First and foremost, if there's a professional involved, let's say, just for argument's sake, let's say there's somebody who's in medical practice, a doctor, very successful practice. Now you have to figure out what's going to happen to that practice, because obviously the wife who never worked just stayed with the kids and so on and so forth. Now somebody needs to figure out what belongs to her and what belongs to the doctor. You get into a business valuation part of a professional practice where you actually carve out the goodwill. And in some cases, you leave the goodwill in, depending on if it's a community property or not. I don't think that anybody else other than a CPA can actually figure those things out for you. Now, you were mentioning the assets owned by the spouses together, by the couple, as a joint ownership. And now you have to figure out what's the net worth of this property. Maybe one decides to keep the property in lieu of maybe letting something else go. If there's a retirement fund involved, somebody will need to do the calculations that, yeah, the retirement fund might be worth $1 million, but how much cash are you going to get once you take it out, and then carve it out, and how much of that belongs to each spouse, and those kind of things. So all these things that I'm mentioning, they sound very simple on the surface, but when you actually sit down and start figuring these things out, yes, you need a professional to figure all these things out, and that's where a CPA would come in and hopefully do a good job for you and provide you all that information that makes everybody happy in the end.
No, I think, Dan, I would agree with you as practitioners that statements are required to be filed in the court when you are going through the divorce proceedings, like how your assets are going to be divided. So you have to give your expenses and assets. And there has to be, again, full and fair disclosure. Don't commit any fraud. And I think this is where a CPA can play a really good role in advising the clients that you are signing these statements under oath of perjury, and this is a notarized statement, so don't try to play with it in any ways. And of course, CPAs can definitely play a very good role. So now, Dan, next question to you is, most often, let us say that one spouse is very strong because he's the one who has been managing finances, and whereas the other spouse has been a kind of homemaker, she's not very active. So that person who's a dominant spouse, he comes to you and he asks you, look, we do not want to hire another lawyer. I know that we need to have separate lawyers. I do not want to do it. Now, will you be able to draft a post-nuptial agreement for us? How will you respond to this kind of request?
I personally wouldn't do it because I think it's unfair and unethical to use your talents and abilities to take advantage of somebody. And unrepresented people, naive people are easily taken advantage of, and that's just not something I'm interested in participating in. I just had someone come to my office about a week ago with that same request, trying to save money by having one lawyer, but that lawyer has a conflict of interest. I think each spouse should have their own lawyer, and someone reading the agreement from their point of view, making sure their interests are protected and not trying to be neutral or in the middle. There's no such thing as neutrality in American law. Everybody has their own lawyer, and the result of the two lawyers fighting each other is what we call justice.
No, I agree with you, Dan, because as we said, there has to be a full and fair disclosure of all the assets, and moreover, as a lawyer, you can represent one, not both the parties to it. And unfortunately, people try to save money, and they would come to family practitioner like Dan and tell him, other lawyer is willing to do it, why you are saying no, but he has given a good reason. It's unethical. And in addition to that, I think courts are going to scrutinize these kinds of agreements.
Oh, yes.
And they are going to throw it out if they
Yes.
find that there was an element of fraud or duress. So would you like to say something? How
Overreaching.
courts respond?
One of the provisions of most of these agreements is and should be a recitation that both parties have been advised by attorneys. And usually they'll put the name of the attorney in there so that somebody looking at the agreement 5 years from now can see that both sides had full representation. Somebody checking the assets, checking the representations, not just believing. It's very common in a marriage that one spouse doesn't really know all about the financial aspects of it, the financial profile of the family. Many spouses are completely ignorant about that. As long as they have enough money to pay the bills, they don't know the full extent of the finances. So this is something that an accountant would be extremely useful in looking at a balance sheet that's provided to see if it makes sense, if it's lopsided, if it's things just don't add up the way they should. And I would always recommend someone with substantial assets to utilize the services of a CPA in examining the financial statement to see that something isn't missing or left out.
Sure. And then on the same token, as you had mentioned, conflict of interest. I think the both parties should get an independent review of the financials from their own accountants if possible.
I think that's a very important comment, Mr. Baloch. If you have been preparing tax returns and you have been a financial advisor to a couple, and now they are fighting in the court, if they are approaching you to guide, one of them or both of them, and probably because of conflict of interest, as Dan said, you probably also like to stay away.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's-
And furthermore, they can use the services of an accountant for certain assets that are very hard to evaluate,
Correct.
such as a pension, which is a future income stream. And calculating the present value of a future income stream is something that most people wouldn't know how to do. But an accountant would certainly be able to help in that.
And now, have you come across the situations where courts have really said, we are not going to validate this post-nup agreement, and they are likely to just say that it's not valid anymore because they see there was an element of duress. So have you come across that kind of situation, or it is treated as an ordinary contract which is signed by two adult parties, maybe it's notarized, so on the face value it looks like it's a good agreement, but there is an element of duress.
Duress and overreaching are commonly claimed. They're hard to prove. And a person should be very careful what they sign.
And what if the other person can show to the court that this person didn't make a full disclosure of all the assets?
That's another story altogether. That's fraud.
Fraud.
And it has to be substantial. It can't be just a couple $100, but that can be one grounds for overturning such an agreement.
Great. I think we have got to wrap it up now because cameraman is indicating that we have come to the close of the time allotted to us. Before I say goodbye, I would like to thank you again.
Thank you.
And thank you, Mr. Baloch.
Thank you.
I enjoyed your presence here at the panel discussion forum, and hopefully we will be here again. Thank you.